So, hello and welcome along to another edition of Isolation Interviews for Hospital Radio Reading and for my YouTube channel. And I'm super excited that joining me all the way from Australia is the fantastic Menik Gooneratne. I hope I pronounced that right.
Gooneratne, but you're very close.
Gooneratne.
It's a
Oh,
pleasure to be here.
now I was going to say, you're obviously over in Australia. How are things over there for you? I mean, obviously we've got through the last couple of years with the pandemics and everything, but how are things now for you? How is life?
Life is good. I've actually been living in the States for the last 7 years, so I only just moved back to Melbourne in January of this year. So I've been kind of readjusting to being back in Melbourne and life how it is in Australia. So yeah, it's been good.
I mean, that must be quite nice to have kind of spent time in both Australia and in the US. And I mean, how do you find they differ? I mean, obviously, the weather's probably a bit different in both, but what is it like
Yeah.
going between the two?
I mean, I lived in Los Angeles, so it's a really big city. So that was a real big, even though we grew up with American TV shows, like it was still a big culture shock having to like move there and actually live there day to day. But I loved it. I'm an actor, so the industry is really there, and I was really busy and I met lots of amazing people. But it's also really nice to be back home because all of our family is here. It's a little bit life's a little bit more slower paced. It's great for the kids. So they would be the bigger differences, I think. But yeah, there's pros and cons to both. Yeah.
I mean, for you, where did the love of acting first come from? How did you kind of know that that was where you wanted to head?
Oh, I think I've always wanted it. I think I was a really shy kid, but I found that I had no problem being on stage and performing. And I think for me, it was more like I wanted to explore that because acting gave me a chance to do the things that I was too scared to do in real life or express the emotions that I was too scared to do. So for me, that was where my journey started. But it really wasn't until I got to like university that I wanted to I seriously started looking into acting as a career.
Was it something that was in the family, or was it, were you the sort of first in your family?
Oh my God, no, absolutely not. My dad is an engineer and my mum worked in a bank. And my brother is now a musician and I'm an actor. So my parents are like, where did we go wrong? What happened here? Where did this come from?
I mean, it must be quite nice to, be able to do what you love. I mean, when you first started out, how was that? Because it's, acting is a very sort of hard industry to get into. So, how did you manage to sort of break those doors down and get yourself known?
Oh, it was really hard because, like we said, no one I knew in my circles was in the industry, so it was a lot of trial and error and like doing just like seeing what it is I should do. And it took a long time, I've got to say. Like it took me a good 10 years when I first started really like seriously wanting to get into acting, and actually then having my big break on Neighbours. It took a lot of time and a lot of frustrations. Really, it was just I just did everything I could. I did all the acting classes I could. I did all the casting director workshops and just met people, and then slowly kind of found my feet.
I mean, obviously, Neighbours was a big part of your
Yeah.
life. How did that first come about for yourself? Because you didn't join necessarily as like a regular. You came in as a bit of a guest who then became a regular. So how was that? That must have been quite
Um,
an intense process.
it actually, honestly, it's one of the easiest gigs that I got. When you think of like the journey and the frustrations of going, if only I could just land a big role and everything. And I'd been taping for various different characters on Neighbours, and the casting director Thea kept saying to me, "Oh, the producers really like you, and they want to find something that's really like that's perfect for you." And so I kept going, "Oh yeah, whatever, okay." And then this role, Priya, actually was handed to me, so it came out of the blue, and it was this thing. Even though I was a guest character at the start, the dialogue and the conversation was we want these characters to be series regulars. So, but what we want to do is introduce them slowly because we found that the best way to have these characters be loved is to actually slowly introduce them as opposed to them just rocking up on the street and going, hey, here we are. So, even from the first moment I was playing Priya Kapoor, I knew that that was the end goal for them. So it was actually really lovely to kind of have this character. I never auditioned for her. So it was fun on my first day on set. I was like, what do you want her to be? Because we haven't had these discussions in the audition room. So yeah, it was a really nice kind of moment of validation.
And I mean, obviously, Priya kind of had a bit of a rocky road through her time on the show. I mean, she must have been a lot of fun to play. I mean, the affair with Paul
Oh
Robinson, you know.
yeah. Oh my gosh, I feel like I hit the jackpot with Priya. I ticked all the soapy boxes. I got to kiss Paul Robinson. I got to die in a blaze of glory. I got to come back as a ghost. Like, what more can you want?
And you must have also felt really blessed that you had, such a nice family unit to be a part of. The Kapoors were a great family. Obviously, you had Rani, the daughter, and AJ. So you must. Did you get on well? What was it like working with them on and off screen? I imagine.
It was really nice because it is nice, like when you start a new job, to actually have other people who are also starting that job at the same time. So we did have that kind of support between the three of us. I really bonded with Coco. So she's like my pseudo daughter still. Actually, the funny thing is, her birthday is the same date as my firstborn, as my son, my oldest son. So it's like I always remember her birthday because it's like you are my first child, and now my second child also has the same birthday. So it was really nice to kind of like, also it was her first acting job ever, and to kind of be able to be there for her as a support and watch her blossom and grow like a real proud mum.
And I mean, I was looking actually, and I believe nowadays she's doing a lot of like humanitarian work. So really changed from what she was doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was just really refreshing when she was on Neighbours as well, because she didn't quite know what her path was going to be. So she's like, I'm not sure if I want to continue with the acting. Maybe I'll do dancing. Maybe I'll do this. And it was just a really lovely um, overall perspective of the world, and not like going, this is what I want to be at 14. This is what I have to be. So it was nice. And it's great to see where she's ended up.
Now, obviously, when you're doing a soap like Neighbours, I imagine it is very full on because the hours are long, the emotions are heavy at times. When it gets to
Hmm.
the point when you're doing long, long sort of days of hard scenes, how do you kind of train yourself to get through that? Because I imagine it must be very emotionally draining.
It is. I remember like when I was lucky. My like Priya had the A storyline for the majority of the time that I was there. So I was really busy when I was working on Neighbours. And you'd have these days, because the way that they'd shoot Neighbours as well is you'd have a block, which is like a week of episodes, and you'd shoot them in two sections. You'd shoot the locations, so all the outside scenes on the first week, and on the second week you do all your studio scenes. So there were days where I would be in studio the entire day, and I'd shoot 12 scenes back to back, and you'd come out of that just a melted puddle of mush. Like I could not string two words together that weren't on a bit of paper in front of me to say. Um, but it was, I mean, I love a challenge. And even though it was like physically and emotionally draining, it was still such a great feeling to go, oh, I just nailed 12 scenes. I've been in there all day. But also, the more that you do it, the easier it is to retain the lines, because it's like a muscle, right? Like that muscle memory, every time you learn a line, it gets in there a bit better. And also, the longer you are on the show, the more the writers write to your rhythms. So it actually becomes easier as you go along, because it's kind of logical, the lines is what you would say. Yeah.
I imagine as well that when you're doing like we were saying those long days and hard work, it must make it. Does it make it easier when you kind of are working with the fellow actors that you know well? So when you're doing the Kapoor scenes, because you're all you've got to work together a lot and you get to know each other, so you know how each other works. Does that make it easier?
Yeah, it does. It does make it easier. Like the more it's the more comfortable you are as well, right? The more you know the people, the crew, and like everyone. We're a nice big family, so yeah, it is like it does become that easy. It becomes easy. Yeah.
And I imagine doing those scenes where you're for example, the affair. Is that more fun than when you're just kind of having sort of like nice scenes? Do you prefer playing, or did you prefer playing Priya kind of not nasty, because she wasn't a nasty character, but just that more naughty side of her?
Oh, I loved it. I loved all those things, because yeah, everything that was out of the ordinary and not just us sitting at a table and talking was so much fun. And it was really like I loved the affair storyline, because it was more challenging of how you can keep her. She's doing a bad thing, but she's still a likable person, and how you kind of like walk on that fine line to make sure she's not villainized too much or she's not too much of this. Like I loved it. And I loved working with Stefan too. It was, he's so iconic and he's such a generous actor as well.
Was there many conversations going on behind the scenes, kind of like trying to like choreograph and like work out I'm going to do this and maybe you try this? How do you, when you have to do those very romantic scenes, how do you kind of work it out?
Well, it's like a dance. Like it's one of those things where it is like there's a lot of respect and a lot of like boundaries put up and things like that. We have to be quite respectful. And so we do, before we do any of those scenes, you do talk it through and it is choreographed like a dance, like, any of those things. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this and then you're going to do that. How do you feel about that? Yeah, I'm good with that. Okay, let's do that. So yeah, so no one's surprised.
Now, one of my previous guests that I had on the show was the fantastic Geordie Lucas, who I know you did an interview with for her
Yeah,
podcast. When you get to
yeah.
work with, these, lovely people, what is the takeaway from it? What is it you sort of love most about getting to work with great people?
Well, I think in this career, in this industry, a lot of the time you're away from your family a lot of the time. And it's long days, it's long hours, long weeks. And it makes it so much more rewarding when the people you work with are also lovely to be around. And I think that's what's, as much as it's like a great job to have, being around nice people and working with nice people, it just makes the day so much better. So I think that's like the best thing to come from any of that.
And when they decided to kill your character off, was that the point you were thinking of leaving? Were you ready to go, or was it kind of taken out your hands a bit?
Um, it wasn't my choice, but I was ready to leave. I think it was one of those things, like I said, like I've been so lucky the entire time I was there. We've done so much with Priya. And honestly, at that point, I was thinking, where can we take her? That's not boring. Like it is like, sometimes when you're on these soaps, there's a huge ensemble cast. Like so, sometimes it's not your turn. So sometimes you are just there to be the person who listens to the person who has the A storyline, and like it can kind of like not be as challenging or as interesting to be there, but you do it because that's just part and parcel of the job. So I was thinking like, where can we take her? And so it felt like a logical conclusion. I was still really sad because like Priya, I was so invested in Priya. So for me, it's like, oh, it's so sad that this is where her journey ends. Like just in Priya world, like, oh, she just reconnected with AJ and now she's gone. It's so sad for her. But for me as an actor, I was, I think it was definitely the right time. And it also, it meant that I opened me up to go and explore the rest of the world and all other acting opportunities. And I haven't looked back. So it's been great.
And I imagine as well that had you not been, or had Priya not been killed off, do you think you would have potentially been tempted to go back? Do you think it was good that the door was maybe closed firmly, or?
Well, I mean, never say never because you can always be like the evil twin, right? It's a soap. If you really want to come back and they really want you to come back, there's ways of getting around that. But I got into this job to play a bunch of different characters, and there's this temptation when you're in a nice place and it's easy to just stay there. And so I'm kind of glad that I was nudged out of the nest because it meant that I could go and explore.
And obviously, the show's been on such a journey recently, being cancelled. Now it's come back, and the first episodes have literally aired. Have you been watching? Have you been keeping up with what's been going on the show?
I haven't. I've seen all the posts. Actually saw Alan Fletcher. I have a short film that just that's been doing the rounds in Australia now. It was over in the States, and Alan Fletcher came to our Australian premiere, so I got to catch up with him. And it's been such a long time, but I haven't had time to sit down and watch the show just yet. But I'll definitely be checking out to see what everyone's up to.
And do you get chance to sort of like, you said about catching up with Alan, but do you get to keep in contact with many of the cast? Or I know that, an actor's industry is very tough because you move on to the next job and it's hard to keep in contact. But have you had chance to keep in contact with many people?
Um, it was such a long time ago. There were a couple of people. So Saskia Hampel, who played Georgia, we moved over to LA at the same time. So we hung out quite a bit over there. And there was a few other people like Sarah Roberts, who played a guest character who I am still really close with, who I kind of reconnected with in LA. But yeah, it's been such a long time. Oh, and also Kaya Jones. I just recently reconnected with her. So I think now that I'm back in Australia, I feel like I'll cross paths with a few more a few more of the people. But in LA, it was a bit more difficult to keep in contact.
And I imagine when you leave a soap like Neighbours, and that a lot of actors then find that's the great time to go over to the States. How did you
Mm-hmm.
find the whole pilot season and the working in America? How was that? Because I imagine that is probably even tougher than in Australia because it's such a bigger industry.
It is, but oh no, I loved it. I loved it, and I think for me, I always felt that I needed to be in the States. Like just being an actor of color, Australia's industry is really small, so there aren't as many opportunities for anyone, let alone people of color. I think that like that's changing now, but that was my experience back then. So to move to LA, I've always wanted to get there, and Neighbours gave me that little bit extra to be able to make it a little bit easier going to the States because everyone knows Neighbours because of Margot and et cetera, et cetera. Um, I literally, my first pilot season in LA, I had more auditions than I had in my entire career in Australia. So I knew then and there that this was the best place to be. And yes, it's more competitive, but you actually have more chances. And I think that's where my craft really flourished because I was able to practice it a lot more with a lot more frequency than I was over in Australia.
And I mean, obviously, you did touch upon it. It is hard for actors of color, and obviously, on Neighbours, you were sort of one of the first regular families of color, which is madness. That why did it take so long for it to happen? I mean, we're moving forward, but we still got a way to go, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, I think, I was in a really lucky, special place where I got to be part of that first family, and there was a huge responsibility. I've kind of felt myself, not that I was told that, but for me, I think it was, for representation and having different faces on screen. So I took that job really seriously of making sure that we did a good job. It is strange. It is funny to think like how it's taken so long for it to happen, but I'm glad that the conversation is there now and that we are moving forward and things are getting a lot better than they were. So I'm excited to see what the future holds for Australian TV in general.
Now, I mean, obviously, you've played many roles over the years, but for you, is there a favorite role that you've played? What is it you love when you get a script? What is it that entices you?
um, I like it when I get to do something I haven't done before. So I think one of my most favorite roles that I've played is I was in a Peter Jackson film that we shot in New Zealand when I moved to the States. And I got to play like an action hero. And I was like, I'd never in my career up until the point, I was like, you see me as what now? Usually I'm like, the teacher or the intellectual or the whatever. Like, so I love it whenever I can be challenged. So that I mean, also I worked with Peter Jackson on that film, and that was just a mind blowing experience to be in a blockbuster action film. But I also in the States I got to do a lot of sci-fi, and I really love sci-fi. So I think for me, any role that challenges me outside of my comfort zone is something that I will always run to because I think you can grow so much when you're outside your comfort zone.
Have you got a dream role? Is there a show or a role you would love to do going forward?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I'm writing my own stuff now, so I feel like I'm writing my dream roles in a way, and creating hopefully creating these movies and TV series that I can be in, or the characters that I'd like to see myself play. But I love comedy and I love action, so something that involves like action and comedy and maybe a little bit of sci-fi thrown into it, just
I could
cause.
I could imagine you in an episode of Doctor Who. I think that'd be fantastic.
I'd love to be a Doctor Who. Yeah, I've said that for years. I would love to be a Doctor
Now, obviously, having done, straight acting, comedy, you get to do a bit of it all. I mean, that must be such a pleasure and a joy to go from one project to the other, and you kind of never know from one day to the next what you're going to be doing next.
Who. Yeah, it is fun. It's chaotic, and I love it. My husband's an engineer, and he absolutely hates it. It's like he loves structure and routine, and then he's married me, who's just like chaos, change. Oh, let's do this, let's do that. But yeah,
And what sort of bit of advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self? What would you say to your younger self?
um, that everything will be okay, and that uh, the more true that you stay to yourself, the more satisfying life will be. Yeah.
Now, hopefully, we'll get you over in the UK. You should come along to the UK at some point.
Yeah.
But I mean, sort of as we sort of wrap things up, what would you like to say to the patients who are currently stuck in hospital, and to the amazing, healthcare workers all around the world who have done such an amazing job, not just through the pandemic, but ongoing? What would you like to say to them?
Well, thank you so much to the healthcare workers. You play such an important, invaluable role in our society, and I'm sorry that it's taken a pandemic for us to really appreciate the work that the selfless acts that you do every day. And for the people in hospital, stick in there. I know you're going through a really tough time, and there is hope at the end of the tunnel. And I hope that you find things that can make you stay positive, and that you're surrounded with love and support, and that when you look back, this is just a little blip um, in your life.
Now, I just want to say, Monique, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for giving up your time. Of course, keep safe, and you're welcome back anytime.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been such a joy talking to you.